Let's talk about the powerful people in politics that were friends of Jeffrey Epstein, including former President Bill Clinton, who I think records show flew on his jet several times. President Trump is quoted with glowing words about him back in 2002.
He is. In fact, we have that from 2002. He talked about him to New York Magazine, saying that he's a fun guy. I've known Jeff for 15 years, he said in 2002. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It's even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. No doubt about it, Jeffrey enjoys his social life. Obviously, that's seen in a far different light today. But you're right, there is a connection here. You mentioned former President Clinton flying on his plane multiple times, being on his private island. President Trump reportedly at least once on his plane. The two reportedly dined together. And at one point, Epstein was actually a member at Mar-a-Lago and had been to Mar-a-Lago, but then was barred at one point after, according to court records, which Julie Brown also wrote about, he was accused of sexually assaulting an underage girl there.
I would be remiss not to bring up with you the current Labor Secretary, Alexander Ocasio, who is very tied to this because he was a big part of securing this sweet plea deal for Epstein back in 2008 that got him, very little jail time, charged with prostitution, not sex trafficking. And, by the way, that none of the victims knew about.
No, they didn't. So a couple of points there. Number one, you're right. So Alexander Ocasio at the time was the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District. So he had to oversee this deal. He had to basically say, okay, with the team of attorneys. And at the time, he said, well, they lacked the evidence to prove that he had violated federal law. There's been a lot of pushback on that since, but he essentially had to sign off on it. Well, the DOJ is investigating how the case was handled. We should also point out that in February, a federal judge said this deal broke the law because, to your point, victims didn't know about it. The terms of this deal, which it's been said multiple times, were basically dictated by Epstein's attorneys, powerful attorneys. They didn't know about it. The deal was kept quiet, kept apart from the victims until a judge had signed off for it. You can't do that. That broke the law.
Erica Hill, thank you. Great reporting. Obviously, he'll be on this all day because he's going to be in court later this morning. Let's talk about legally where this goes. CNN legal analyst Renato Mariotti is here, former federal prosecutor. You're such a good voice for this because you have actually prosecuted sex trafficking cases before. One thing that Shimon said outside the courthouse moments ago that struck me is that what may be different this time than the plea deal in 2008, if this goes to trial, is that they have 3 cooperators. And those are apparently some of the employees that arranged this travel of these underage girls to be with Epstein, et cetera. How significant is that?
Well, it's important. I mean, frankly, I think the case is going to rise and fall for the Southern District of New York on the testimony of those cooperators. These cases are very difficult to investigate. They're very difficult to prosecute. Often, minors who are abused have difficulty coming forward and testifying. They have difficulty, essentially going through and doing what they would need to do to be a witness in a case. So really here, the testimony of those cooperators has to be strong in order for the Southern District to make its case in court. And what I think this indictment tells us is that the Southern District believes that they have testimony that can back these charges up.
When you look at the deal that was struck, that raised so many questions that the victims didn't know about, what do you think the questions are going to be now, not only for Alexander Ocasio, the current Labor Secretary, who was a big part of this, but the judge who signed off on it?
Yeah, I have to say there are very significant questions about Mr. Ocasio's actions there. Really, there has to be something very significant behind the scenes that caused that series of events. There's clearly misconduct by not informing victims. It appears at some point there was misrepresentations that were made to the court. Very serious misconduct by Justice Department attorneys. Victims need to know, particularly in cases like this. When I did investigate human trafficking cases and sexual abuse cases of minors, those victims are counting on you as a prosecutor. They have a right to have access to you. They have a right to be heard, and they are counting on you to prosecute and act fairly.
And it is interesting that the federal prosecutors working on this that are going to hold this press conference in a little under an hour are from the Southern District of New York's Public Corruption Unit. What does that tell you?
It could be a coincidence. It could be they just have time on their plates. But it also could mean that there is some tie to this case, either from the angle you just talked about or another. There's an potential obstruction provision. Perhaps there is a public official that is at least tangentially involved in this case and could become part of it later on.
Well, all really important questions to be answered. Renato Mariotti, thank you so much.